Seneca again. Letter 65. This, well, as I've always said, this is an interesting one. It is. This one is different, though. Um, I have more, meta thoughts on this, you might say. Because the content itself of this letter is not so much insightful as much as it gets you to kind of think about some things. One thing that this, and not just this letter, but like every letter, has kind of brought to mind that I always thought was interesting was it really makes me see how similar the people in ancient Rome are to us today. Now, of course, I'm not saying that they're identical because, Dan Carlin has a saying, the past is like a foreign country, they do things different there. And that's true. I'm not saying that everything's the same, but the people are a lot more like us than we may think. And there's also very, very much a tendency to think that people in the past were kind of dullards. Like in the distant past, before the technology era, they must have been kind of dumb, you know? And that's just not true, even a little bit. Actually, in many cases, I was going to say the average person, but that's not really true. The average person probably was a moron. I mean, that's true today, too. No offense to those watching. But, uh, they had the same, I would say, probably distribution back then as now. Now, there's, in terms of like intelligence, is what I mean. Um, we have a lot more advantages these days, I would say. The average person today lives greater than a king. Nebuchadnezzar didn't have Starbucks um, or Chick-fil-A. Anyway, more importantly, he lived in the Middle East and he didn't have air conditioning. Good grief. There's only so much a slave with a palm leaf can do to cool you down. Anyway, the point that I'm getting at is that there's so much similarity in the way that they thought back then compared to today. And I'm not saying that if you could go in the past, you know, I'm getting beside the point. Um, and one of the things this particular letter, 65, it has two parts. The first part is conversation about something that's not really important. He wants Lucilius to like settle a bet, basically, um, about the nature of reality. This is something that philosophers did a lot back then. One thing that was different back then as opposed to now is that philosophers kind of tried to be jacks of all trades. Okay, I wanted to make sure I made the right word plural, and they like Seneca is mostly known for his morals, his practical living, and things like that. But Stoicism did have concerns about the nature of the physical universe. So they didn't separate things in the same way that we do. So they talked about how I don't want to be getting into too much detail because the point that I'm getting at, this is an interesting letter to read just in general, but it's not for the most part something that's too applicable today. But like the Stoics believe that where is it? This is the first sentence of the second paragraph. There are two elements from the universe from which all things are derived, namely cause and matter. So, one thing that I think is really interesting about this is that nobody today really thinks of that the same way today. You're not going to go to Harvard physics department and say, hey, when we discuss black holes, we need to talk about cause and matter. No one cares about that. Um, But that's not really what I think is interesting about this is that they were working with a much smaller data set, but the method was the same. They still had the scientific method. It was not as refined as we have it today, but the primary difference between then and now is how much data we have then. And it is not the level of intelligence that we have. But we have more data. Process is more refined. In some ways, it's kind of badly refined. But um, but that's a different story. Just by that I mean like the way that the science can be abused is what I'm getting at. By badly refined, but the process of the scientific method is really just kind of common sense. Um, and it goes back at least to Thales. Thales was supposed to be like the first philosopher of all time, more or less. That is a ridiculously oversimplified description, as I'm sure anybody would agree. But he definitely was an important philosopher, no doubt. Um, but at any rate, I know I'm kind of rambling, but the point I'm saying is that the methodology is largely the same, and it was kind of revitalized in the Renaissance. The second part of the letter was different. It was kind of justifying. So the first part of the letter, he's like basically discussing things that are not really directly applicable to our lives. And in the second half of the letter, Seneca's justifying it, basically describing it as this is my description, and I'm oversimplifying his talk. He talks about this the soul needs to leave the body. He has I guess he has kind of the Platonic idea that uh, the soul is imprisoned in the body. That's distinct from the Christian idea that the body is the home of the soul, but the body is fallen, as is the soul. And in the resurrection, it will be a better unfallen, because restored is better, I should say, home. Anyway, but he basically justifies this, which seems contrary to one of the previous letters. I can't remember which one, but I know I talked about it. Um, by saying it's recreational because it kind of lets the soul roam free from the body. Today, I think people call that dissociating, and that's not the correct use of the term dissociating, but that's what they say on TikTok. Uh, yeah, I think that's everything that I want to talk about. Interesting letter, fun to read, kind of dense. I had a hard time getting through it, mostly just because I was kind of distracted today. Um, but uh, but not very impactful. I just thought it was kind of it made me think about a lot of different things. I thought.